A farmer grows wheat but needs apples. The apple grower only wants fish. The fisherman doesn't want wheat, he wants wood. The woodcutter wants wheat, but the farmer already went home. Nobody can trade with anyone. This is the barter problem, the oldest deadlock in human economic history, and for thousands of years the solution wasn't gold, wasn't paper, and definitely wasn't a bank. It was a tiny, glossy shell pulled from the warm shallows of the Indian Ocean. For money to actually work, it has to solve 4 problems at once. It needs to be durable, something that doesn't rot, rust, or fall apart before you spend it. It needs to be portable, light enough to carry without hiring a donkey. It needs to be divisible. You should be able to buy a small loaf of bread without handing over your entire life savings. And it needs to be scarce. If anyone can make more of it, it's worthless immediately. Test almost any random object against those 4 requirements and it fails fast. Bread rots within days. Feathers crumble and burn. Rocks are too heavy and too common. Livestock wanders off. The cowrie shell, specifically the Monetaria moneta species found almost exclusively in the lagoons of the Maldives Islands, passes every single test. The shell is smooth, hard, and almost indestructible. It's small enough to carry hundreds in a pouch. It comes in naturally uniform sizes so you can count it rather than weigh it. And most critically, you cannot fake one. Counterfeiting a cowrie shell requires either living near the Maldives or traveling thousands of miles across the Indian Ocean, which was, for most of human history, simply not a realistic option. What happened next is one of the most remarkable accidents in economic history. With zero coordination, zero treaties, and zero central authority, cowrie shells became the dominant currency across sub-Saharan Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and China simultaneously. Rulers in the Mali Empire used them to pay soldiers. Chinese merchants used them for long-distance trade. Ancient Indian texts reference them as standard units of value. The world's first global currency wasn't designed by any government. It was picked up off a beach. But shells have one fatal flaw. The supply isn't perfectly controlled. When Portuguese traders flooded West Africa with shells harvested from the Maldives in the 1600s, the oversupply wiped out the purchasing power of the currency entirely within a few decades. Scarcity is not a feature you can borrow from geography forever. The solution the ancient world discovered was metal, specifically gold and silver. Both metals are extraordinarily rare in their pure form. Both are soft enough to be divided and shaped without special tools. And both are chemically inert. Gold buried in the ground for 1,000 years comes out looking exactly the same as the day it went in. But pure metal created a new problem. Every single transaction required weighing the metal on a scale and then arguing about whether the scale was accurate. A merchant selling grain had to trust that the lump of silver the buyer offered was actually the weight and purity claimed. And in a world without standardized testing, fraud was constant and exhausting. The Lydian Kingdom, in what is now Western Turkey, solved this in approximately 600 BC. They began striking coins, small, standardized discs of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, stamped with the king's image. That stamp was not decorative. It was a sovereign guarantee of purity. The king's face meant this coin has been tested and certified. And if it's wrong, you have a complaint against the government of Lydia, not just the merchant who handed it to you. Within 2 centuries, every major civilization in the Mediterranean and Near East had copied the idea. The coin didn't just simplify trade. It moved the burden of trust from the buyer to the state. But carrying physical gold still had problems, and medieval Europe stumbled into the next revolution almost by accident. Wealthy merchants needed somewhere to store their gold safely, so they brought it to goldsmiths, who had the strongest vaults in town. The goldsmith gave the merchant a paper receipt proving the deposit, and fairly quickly, merchants realized something useful. Instead of withdrawing gold and handing it to someone else, you could just hand over the receipt. The receipt was lighter, safer, and easier to carry, and as long as everyone trusted the goldsmith, it worked exactly like gold. Here is where it gets interesting. Goldsmiths started noticing a pattern. On any given day, only a tiny fraction of their depositors came to collect actual gold, maybe 10% on a busy day. The other 90% of the gold just sat in the vault, untouched. So the goldsmiths started doing something that would have been considered fraud if anyone had examined it carefully. They began writing extra receipts that represented gold they didn't actually have, and lending those receipts out at interest. They were creating money from nothing, backed by the statistical probability that not everyone would show up at once. This is fractional reserve banking, and it is not a historical curiosity. Every single commercial bank operating today, from a local credit union to the largest institution on Wall Street, still operates on this exact principle. The numbers your bank account shows are not coins locked in a vault with your name on them. They are promises, held together by trust and by the mathematical likelihood that not everyone will withdraw at once. The logical endpoint of this system arrived on August 15, 1971, when President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold at a fixed rate. The gold standard was over. From that moment, the US dollar, and through it most of the world's currencies, was backed by nothing physical at all. No gold, no silver, no shells. Just the collective agreement of billions of people that a piece of paper or a digital number represented value. This is fiat currency, from the Latin word meaning, let it be done, value created by decree. What followed is the world most people now live in. Your bank account is not a drawer with cash in it. It is a single row in a massive database, a number stored on a server in a data center somewhere, maintained and updated by software. When you tap your credit card at a store, two databases update simultaneously. Your bank's ledger subtracts the amount, the merchant's bank adds it, and not a single physical object changes hands. The transaction takes less than 3 seconds and involves no physical material whatsoever. You are not paying with money. You are changing a number from one value to another. In a ledger that exists entirely in software, modern money is, in the most literal technical sense, just arithmetic. But this is where the story gets its most provocative twist. Money didn't just enable trade. It enabled something far more powerful: specialization. Without a medium of exchange, every person must provide for every one of their own needs. You grow your own food, build your own shelter, make your own clothes, and treat your own illnesses. With money, a surgeon can spend every day performing surgery. She doesn't need to know how to bake bread. She earns money and buys bread from someone who has spent their life mastering bread. Money is the technology that converts human effort into transferable units of value, and then lets those units flow to wherever they are most needed. Every doctor, engineer, artist, and scientist in history was only free to specialize because someone, somewhere decided that a small object, whether a shell, a coin, or a number in a database, could represent the idea of stored value. In October of 2008, during the worst financial crisis in a generation, a person or group operating under the name Satoshi Nakamoto published a 9-page paper proposing a radical alternative. A currency with no issuing bank, no central government, and no trust required in any human institution. Instead of trusting a goldsmith not to print extra receipts, trust would be replaced entirely by mathematics. Every transaction would be verified by a distributed network of computers, and the total supply of the currency would be hard capped by code. Impossible to inflate, impossible to fake, impossible to confiscate by decree. Bitcoin was a direct technical response to the goldsmith problem. What if no single entity could ever issue more receipts than there was gold? Whether it becomes the final form of money, or simply the next shell in a very long chain, is a question that remains genuinely open. But consider this: every time humanity found a better solution to the trust problem, shells to coins, coins to paper, paper to digital entries to cryptographic proof, the entire architecture of civilization reorganized around it. The shell didn't just let a farmer buy apples, it created cities.